hear and easy to understand, and none of this esoteric garbage. And I just started laughing
Yeah,
because you know me
yeah,
well enough to know.
yeah, I know. Yeah.
All right, Nick, are we ready?
Yes, we are ready.
All right, then we might as well get started. So we're going to follow our usual format with an opening and a brief introduction for Bob. I can't give all your titles, our illustrious brother, but I'm going to give a couple. And then we'll move on to the rant and then to discussing the report that you did. By the way, before we begin, even just huge compliments on that report. It's
Oh,
easy
thank
to
you.
read, it's easy to understand. A lot of the questions that I would have asked are answered inside of it, so really well
Okay,
done.
good, good. Thank
And
you.
I'll compliment you again when we're actually going. All right, here we go. Hi, I'm David Riley,
I'm Nicholas Harvey.
and tonight we have with us illustrious brother Robert G. Davis, 33rd degree, Grand Cross, currently the Deputy Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Oklahoma. Bob, it is a pleasure to have you back. Welcome.
It's so good to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
We're going to be talking tonight about a report that Oklahoma has produced on the decline in membership, the causes for that decline in membership, and the solutions that they're looking to implement in their grand jurisdiction. But before we begin, as usual, I have a rant. Anyone who knows me knows that I love my mother lodge. It is made up of ordinary men who each day strive to be extraordinary. My lodge looks like my community. We have professionals who work in a wide range of fields, musicians, artists, public servants, and guys who have two jobs so that they can provide for their family. We have young men and long past masters. And like many groups of men, we like to joke with one another. An outsider, however, should use caution. I've never seen a group of men close ranks so suddenly and with such perfectly unified purpose as when someone from the outside speaks against one of us. We're friends. I'm always surprised at how various brothers are involved in one another's lives. It has therefore been painful during this time to be separated from them. To not be able to feel those friendly handshakes and fraternal hugs has made an already difficult situation seem even more lonely. Of course, we're communicating. We're chatting online. We're planning a virtual session to replace our usual meeting. We're in communication by email with our member in Italy. We're calling our older and more vulnerable members. We're asking one another questions about the research we're trying to conduct. And I plan to announce virtual candidate education next week. But it is, of course, not the same. And we're praying for one another with faith that the grand architect of the universe hears us and is compassionate. We've all heard the various estimates of how many Americans will die because of COVID-19. The members of my lodge are staying away from one another and everyone else because it is what we can do to protect one another and help our community in this difficult time. Those of us who aren't essential workers and those of us who are first responders, those who work in healthcare and those who are suddenly unexpectedly without work, are united in our desire to serve our community, be good citizens, and do our part, whatever that part may be, to compassionate the miseries of our fellow creatures. None of us will be left untouched by this. We will all know someone who succumbs to this virus before it is over, and that is frightening. I think many of us are in a state of what I would call anticipatory grief. And it is here that the lessons of our great institution must be remembered. As Master Masons, we know. We do not hope, we do not think, we do not guess or hypothesize. We know that the grave is not a destination, but a gate through which we will all one day pass. We know that there is some part in each of us which bears the closest resemblance to the divine, which is immortal and survives. And so we wait. We do what we must to protect ourselves, those we love, and strangers alike. We hold tight to the friendships we have made, reaching out and offering one another the reassurance of the reciprocal duties of love and affection. It seems to me that there should be no group of men more prepared for the present emergency, no group of men more willing to make a transitory sacrifice in order to relieve the suffering of others, and no group of men more able to look at death and sustain faith, hope, and charity than my brothers. The members of my lodge are ordinary men, but they are my friends and brothers. I have seen them, however, in recent days demonstrate that they are extraordinary in their care for one another and in their dedication to their communities. Their faith, their compassion, their love for one another, and their ability to maintain hope inspire me. Nick and I want all of you to know that we pray for the health and safety of all our brothers and their families. And we know that each of you, each and every one of you, are making every effort to be that light in the darkness for others. All the darkness in the world cannot extinguish even a single light. Thank you. This episode is dedicated to our brother Alessandro. You are braver than you know, better than you realize, and even when you think you are alone, your brothers are with you. And that's tonight's rant.
Beautifully said.
Bob, I am so impressed with this report from Oklahoma's, let me get this right, your Education and Strategic Planning Committees of the Grand Lodge of Oklahoma. Not only is it thoughtful and well written, but you have gone through and done all the background work necessary to be really persuasive. How did it come about that you decided to write this?
Well, I was very fortunate. I had a Grand Master last year who wanted to do a 5-year plan, and he talked about that during his whole journey through the Grand Lodge elected line, and nothing really came of it. And I was really excited that this was something that was important to him. He had incredible leadership skills, but he just didn't have the person that could make it happen. So in 2019, I asked him if I could expand the Education Committee and Strategic Planning Committee. And since I was the chairman of both committees, if he would mind if we would go ahead and write that strategic plan for the Grand Lodge. And he was elated. And so I can't say enough good about him because, as you know, the way the fraternity works is we do what the Grand Master wants to do, his year. And so too often we have to wait until we're Grand Master to attempt to affect any changes when we ought to be addressing these changes every year that we're in, a position of leadership. And so I was very happy that we were able to put this document together last year. And we've done a number of things on the path to implementation this year. And so it's going to give me the ability to simply spend my time in lodges next year when I'm Grand Master communicating. And that's what I do best. And that's what the fraternity needs more than anything else, meaningful communication with its members. And hopefully the divide that generally exists between local lodges and the Grand Lodges can come together because I am of the mind that all Masonry is local. And we're not going to reconcile our problems except at the local level. And so what I want to do is talk to the membership about the statistical analysis that was done. And we actually did that last year in 6 regional conferences. We had a statewide symposium. It was the It was the largest attendance we've ever had, and so we were able to start the process last year. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue it. And some wonderful things have happened. You know, I just in the last year, I've always thought that things come together for a reason, and they sort of are handed to us at the right time. And I think about I think about the great changes that have occurred in our history, and the two examples that were very important was the change in spirituality that occurred in what was called the axial age. And this was a period of time from about 800 BC to 300 BC, where all of these spiritual leaders came together from all faiths and all cultures, and they all became present at the same time. And the result of what they did during their times and with their followers, they literally they elevated the consciousness of the entire world. And we saw a similar thing, which was tied to the foundings of Freemasonry, and that was the four great movements of the Renaissance, the Reformation, the French Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution. And those four things combined gave us the reason why we are who we are, and they changed everything all over the world. And so here we are in this organization that's been around for 400 years and has been declining for an extended period of time. And it would be very easy to give up and say, well, it was a wonderful institution as long as it lasted, and men are just no longer interested in it, and the last one out turns out the lights. But actually, I think that we're on the cusp of a possible renaissance in our fraternity. And so I'm hoping that that's what's going on here in Oklahoma and in other grand jurisdictions will change our attitudes, our thinking, and our behavior in such a way that we can embrace growth rather than decline. And all of that is sort of suggested in the strategic plan that we've done. But anyway, that's I'm excited about that. I wouldn't want to be a Grand Lodge officer if I didn't have that kind of hope.
Let's go through a little bit of the bad news that you present. You have gathered a tremendous amount of statistical information, but for most of our members who aren't Oklahoma Masons, I think the simple fact that the number of American Freemasons in 1930 was 3,279,778. And in 2017, the Masonic membership was 1,076,626. So we lost roughly 2/3 of our membership.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And the decline has been since 1959 very consistent.
It really has. We reached our peak in United States membership in that year at a little over 4 million men, and we've been on a steady decline every year since then. And that's a long period of time to be in a decline. It's too long a period of a decline to consider that it's a cyclical thing. And the other aspect of the decline is that we need to pay attention to is that while we have been in a steady decline, of course, the number of American males have increased dramatically. From 1960 to the present, while we went from over 4 million members down to actually less than 1 million. We went below the 1 million level in 2019. while that was happening to us, the number of males in America grew from 170 million to 330 million. And I mean, the population, and of that, the number of males, grew from 85 million to 165 million. So I decided to look at what percentage of the male population in America was represented by the Freemasonry, and I discovered that we have had fewer, that percentage has been declining since 1927. And so that begs the question, why has that membership declined? Has it declined because of cultural problems outside the fraternity? Has it declined because of systemic issues within our culture? Has it declined because of internal issues or structural issues within our fraternity? And so we also examined all of those things to determine, kind of where we're at. And I'm convinced that our problems have been mostly structural and not cultural. Obviously, there will always be cultural challenges. We've gone through several periods of a lot of anti-Masonic fervor in our past. As you all know, it was dramatic in the 1820s with the Morgan affair. It was kind of reached its peak again in the 1990s when one of our major Protestant denominations did a study on Freemasonry, and the committee decided that Freemasonry was not incompatible with religion, so they simply fired the head of the committee and concluded that it was. And so we've had to deal with these kinds of criticisms and challenges, but we have survived those. We've got beyond that, and there may still be pockets of anti-Masonic groups within the country, but I would suggest that their voice is now much smaller than it was in the past. And that has largely been the result of we have become a lot more public as an institution. We do a lot more things out in the community than we used to do, and people judge us by what we do more than who we are. And I think also the millennial population in particular has expressed an interest and a curiosity about Freemasonry that did not exist in the 2 or 3 generations before them. And that's been a very positive thing for us. And so I think that the one thing we know, there will always be more American males than there have ever been. And so as long as we can attach ourselves to those that are interested in who we are, what our purpose is, and what we do, there is absolutely no reason that we cannot grow. It's a numbers game. And I went through those numbers in the report, as you saw. And
you do have, I found something very interesting in the report that I don't understand. Because it doesn't fit with my experience in my jurisdiction. I should say in my lodge, because I haven't looked at a jurisdiction-wide survey. Mm-hmm. But you seem to have people, you seem to have men entering as entered apprentices who then don't advance to Fellowcraft and Master Mason.
Yes.
And that doesn't fit my experience. Why do you think that is a problem that Oklahoma is facing?
Well, I think it's a problem that most Grand Lodges are facing. And I don't know if you've looked at the statistics in Florida or Massachusetts, but when you look at those statistics nationwide, we have a fairly large percentage of men that do not advance beyond the entered apprentice degree. Ours happened to be 40%, but the average is a little higher than that across the country. So I I think there's a number of reasons for that, but the most suspect are not valid. And so I think that's one rut we're kind of stuck in that we need to discuss. There's kind of a prevailing attitude in our fraternity that men are not advancing beyond the entered apprentice degree because they're no longer willing to make the commitment to do the memory work before them did. And I absolutely see no evidence that that's true.
I will say that if your candidate education consists solely of memory work, I think it's hard to keep guys enthusiastic. I think you need to talk about what they are memorizing means, as well as making sure that they get the words right.
That's exactly right. And it's, what we have failed to understand is that the Masonic experience itself is very critical to our success. Mm-hmm. And the problem that has occurred to American Freemasonry is that the men who have stayed active in their lodges have only represented one small interest group within the total fraternity. And that's the interest group that loves the ritual. And so we have created these huge lodges with hundreds of members where, less than 10% of their members actually participate. And the 10% that have been participating are the 10% that just happen to love the ritual. We have met their needs, that particular interest group's needs. But the needs of men are much, much broader than that. And so there should be a way that we can address the needs of the larger population of members and just simply use our ritual as the basis for how one joins and becomes acquainted, with our structure and system and the education that we have to teach. And so that's one thing we got to do. We've got to broaden our understanding of what the needs of men are and what they're looking for in a Masonic experience.
My lodge has an inordinate number of members who are ministers of one sort or another, or who have attended Harvard Divinity, or are extremely active in their church in beyond the ordinary ways. And so perhaps I'm a bit biased in thinking it through this way, but I think, I was raised as an Episcopalian, and ritual is central to the understanding of most mainstream denominations. Even if you go off into the more Protestant denominations, there's still a liturgy. There's still a form. We come to church, and it has a flow to it that is familiar to us every Sunday, right? The ritual is a thing in churches. And it's a thing that's respected and valued and that people come for. But it's not all the church is, right? And I think maybe Freemasonry is the same. The ritual is central to our understanding of who we are. It is how we become Masons. It is a focus of our institution, but it isn't all that we are.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it quite like that. So thank you for putting that in my head. I'm going to chew on that for a while.
Yeah.
So you list 8 systemic problems that Freemasonry faces, most of which seem to be around our inability to clearly and succinctly communicate who we are to the world. You say we don't have a clearly understood public agenda. We don't have a clearly identifiable mission. We can't provide the general public with a clear and simple definition of Freemasonry. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's more of a problem now than it was in the past?
Well, actually, I think it's less of a problem now than it was in the past.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that the primary reason that the general public has had little or no understanding about Freemasonry is, number one, did not follow their fathers into the fraternity.
Mm.
And it was the first generation in the history of Freemasonry that was not patriarchal based. And it all happened because of the Depression. But when you look at the fraternity prior to the Great Depression of the 1930s, there was never a time when households had less than two generations of males, and more often had three generations of males living in the same household. And so if your grandfather was a Mason and your father was a Mason, then you knew that you were going to become a Mason because you were in a household that was raised around a Masonic culture. And we never had to solicit members or recruit members because sons always followed their fathers and their grandfathers into the fraternity. And so we didn't even have to let the public know what we were about. It was simply okay because the men in the family were Masons. That was good enough for the wives and the mothers and the grandmothers, and it was good enough for the leaders of the church and the leaders in the community, because we had a fairly large percentage of Masons. And even up until 1960. In 1960 in Oklahoma, 12% of the males were Freemasons. That means that every 1 in every 13 men that you saw on the street was a Freemason. So the community knew us much better then, even though they didn't actually see us. And what happened after the end of World War II had a dramatic impact on our separation from the public. And what happened was that there was a great fear that communism would infiltrate American institutions. And so lodges were told not to talk about Freemasonry. Many lodges actually boarded up their windows in their lodge halls. They wanted to protect themselves from this possible threat that they had just won a world war fighting against. And of course, the problem is an entire generation of men who were the lodge leaders in that era were told, don't say anything about the fraternity. So we were quiet. We were not only quiet, we weren't outside our lodges. And so the public just simply grew beyond us, and we kind of got stuck in that traditional era generation. And we never came, and we have still not come out of that. We are still being governed today by men who are dead and died a long time ago. And, we have not let every new generation that has come around behind them to take over the reins and make the adaptations they need to make to meet the needs of their culture of men. And that's another thing that prior to the Great Depression, we were famous for doing that. When you go back and you look at the history of what Masonic lodges were doing, from the founding era up through the Great Depression, in every generation of men, the Masonic fraternity was adapting itself to be in the center of the popular culture of men. And I can give many examples of that. So it was important for us at that time to be a part of the popular culture of men. And again, that's another thing we just stopped. Look, we did not, the World War II men and those that joined shortly after the war, they by and large became Masons in one day, and they never looked behind their shoulder to see what Freemasonry was made of before their generation. So the culture that we inherited has been the culture of one generation, not the culture of the history of the fraternity. We have to overcome that. Now, I say it's getting better because since Freemasons couldn't figure out how to explain to the public what we did in our tiled recesses, they decided to become more charitable. And so they promoted a lot of community activities, and a lot of charitable works on the part of lodges. Well, in a sense, I thank them for having that vision, because at least they have given Freemasonry a public face in the last 30 years that we largely didn't have before. So that in and of itself has had a great impact on minimizing the effects of the anti-Masonic movement. When you see lodges out doing good all the time, and you see smaller communities where the local lodge is actually the go-to organization for anything that needs to get done, then people will not have a voice in protest to that. And so that has been an aspect that has moved us forward, which I'm happy to see that's happened. So.
I'm going to say something controversial. I know that never happens, but but I want to see if you perceive it the same way. I think that there, and I'm not sure when it happened. I'm sure, it could have started with the split in culture at the Great Depression. It could have happened at some other point. But I think that there's a generation of Masonic leaders who didn't receive good education in the philosophy and in particular the esoteric philosophy of the fraternity, and who, as a result, now they're older and they've moved into positions of leadership in the fraternity because they've been around a long time. They've done a lot of service for the fraternity. They're good guys. They're good men. But now they're in leadership and they really don't know what to do because they didn't get that firm foundation at the beginning. And as a result, they often fail as leaders ultimately because they don't have a good understanding of what the fraternity is at its core identity. And worse, I think some of them know that and are afraid of being found out. So they're actively hostile to better Masonic education, a better understanding on the part of others of the core of the fraternity.
Oh, I think that's very true. As a matter of fact, there has been no meaningful education delivered in lodges for more than 100 years. And so what men do what they're comfortable with. And they're comfortable with the fellowship of men. They're really pretty good at embracing the fraternalism aspects of our fraternity. They love to get together on a regular basis and see their friends in the community who are lodge members. And because everyone needs a ritual structure in their life, the ritual structure of the fraternity they're very comfortable with. And some have taken pride in making sure that they can do the ritual work that's required of them in order to bring members into the fraternity. But beyond that, there has been very little education. And so the older men, the threat has been, I think, older men have been threatened by younger men because younger men are wanting education and they're asking questions of the older men. And the older men, rather than simply saying, my young brother, I was not taught these kinds of things in my youth, tell me what you know. And instead of taking that attitude, they become threatened. And they think these guys are here to make us something that we never were, not understanding that they did not know themselves what we were. And so it's just been a dilemma that the younger generation now is facing. However, having said that, I think that part of the sea change that's taking place today is that there's a lot more education happening in lodges. There's a lot more interest in education. Even the older fellows that felt threatened by it that are allowing it to happen in their lodge are finding that they very much enjoy it themselves. And so I know in Oklahoma we have created a Masonic Speakers Bureau to facilitate that process. The names are on our website. If you want a Masonic education program, there's men all over the state that will come give that to you. And so I think we are solving that dilemma. And I've actually seen this because I do a lot of education programs out in lodges. And I have seen young worshipful masters who have decided to do an education program in their lodge every month. And I have followed those lodges. And the older men, at the very beginning, they'll kind of sit there with their hands crossed, and you can tell that this is just kind of a new experience, and this too will pass. And we got to let the master do what he wants to do this year, but we'll get over him. And then after about 3 or 4 months, they are enjoying these education programs so much that the participation and attendance to their lodge is actually increasing. So I do think this total lack of understanding that we've experienced over our lifetime, my lifetime, and even the lifetime of my father, I think that is going to be something of the past. So that's one of the strategic elements that I think is changing. And that's largely become about because of the World Wide Web. The fact that Masons are having conversations now with other Masons, in other states and all over the world, and all these podcasts are going on. There's so many digital opportunities to enjoy education programs in lodge that all this stuff is being fed to lodges now that weren't even possible 20 years ago.
One of the themes for this podcast has always been to bring back that concept of making daily progress in Freemasonry. That Freemasonry is progressive science in that you learn it a piece at a time, and you learn more daily. And to make it a real profession, that people try to do something every day to increase their understanding of the fraternity, whether it's reading a book or listening to a podcast or spending time in the archives of their lodge, whatever it is that they think best serves them to make that daily progress in Freemasonry. And I think I have found that the younger Masons that join are so much more receptive to that idea than some of our older members. That they're coming into the fraternity with a desire to make daily progress, to treat it seriously, to grow in the fraternity. It's the reason that I jokingly refer to myself, I'm a Gen X ally of the millennials, because I see them really putting that effort into their membership.
Absolutely agree. And unfortunately, a lot of those desires have been met digitally, or they have been met by young men getting acquainted with like-minded men, and then creating these groups that they can communicate with. But more and more, we're seeing it actually happening in lodge, where the younger men, even if there's not a lot of education going on in lodge, the younger men will meet in the parking lot after lodge, and they may still be there at 1 a.m. So they're having these meaningful conversations together as men. And so in a sense, they're making, they're seeing to it that their needs are being met, if it's been largely generation based. Now, the interesting thing about this is this gives us this gives the older generation a real opportunity to become important. And my observation has been that the young men generally know that the older men don't know a lot about Masonry. And when they're told why they don't know a lot of information about Masonry, they can at least understand what happened to that generation of men. But what they want from the older generation of men are father role models, good role models as fathers. My gosh, we live in a culture where an awful lot of young men were raised in single parent households. The divorce rate is absolutely staggering. There is a real father hunger out there among young men, and the wonderful thing about young men is they will adopt anybody as their father. He doesn't have to be their biological father, and this gives us old guys a wonderful opportunity. I can't tell you how many times I've had young men tell me that they love to hear the experiences of the old guys in lodge. They love to hear their stories. There's the one thing we have that the younger generation doesn't have is we have a certain kind of wisdom that they can't have yet simply because they haven't lived as many years as we have. And so here's a way that we can come together through the fraternalistic aspects of our fraternity, where the older men can serve as great role models for the younger men, and the younger men can bring the education to the older men. And that is one of the strategies that we need to become consciously aware of. The problem with the older guys, especially the guys that have kept the lodges alive for the last 40 years, because they knew the ritual and the lodge depended upon them in order to confer the degrees. Enough young men have come into the lodge and have learned the rituals, and all of a sudden the old bulls see themselves sitting on the sideline, and their first reaction is to be one of a threat. Said, my gosh, these guys have put me out to pasture when I've spent the last 35 years of my life keeping this organization alive. And what they have to do is have to get beyond that initial reaction and say, wait a minute, my time has passed. I have already passed the torch to the generation below me who are now ritually proficient to take care of the ritual aspects of the fraternity. I am now their mentor. And isn't it more wonderful to be a mentor to men than it is to be someone who just knows a lot of language of the fraternity? I mean, but we have to awaken their consciousness to understand that role is their role now.
I think we're having a little technical problem.
Oh, okay.
I think it's just you. Nope, you're back.
Okay, it's just me. All right.
Okay. That last speech
Yeah,
I just made.
I absolutely agree. In point of fact, I think my mother lodge, before I joined, not long before I joined, but before I joined, went through one of those generational splits. And I think it could have destroyed the lodge had we not had some very fortunate circumstances, the right people in the right places at the right time to pull it. And I think it's stronger today for having had that experience. But I can see how, if we wouldn't have been lucky, we could have gone dark.
Yep, exactly.
Simply because the older guys had a death grip on the lodge, and the younger guys wanted to change some things, and nobody was willing to compromise.
Yes, exactly.
or to work together across the lines.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I think one thing the younger generation men need to understand is they can't initially have their pie and eat it too. They can't just make sweeping changes, in 1 year. They have to pick one thing at a time that's important to them and get that implemented, and then choose another, so that this whole process of change is a gradual. So they need to have the patience, to see that through, because it's going to be driven by them.
yeah, a wise man once said to me right before I became master of amicable, he said, remember, one thing that you change will stick. Everything else will be gone the next year. So pick the thing you care about.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's true. You don't get to. Not a lot that you do as master of a lodge lasts beyond the year that you're in. Yeah.
Yeah.
I read in you talk about lodge and it's so insightful of you to say that lodge masters are often reluctant to try things that the code is silent on, assuming that it might be prohibited simply because the code
Yes.
doesn't talk about it at all. In
Yes.
Massachusetts, by rumor, because there is no published book of edicts of the Grand Master, and no record of which ones are still in effect and which ones have been modified by subsequent edicts. And as a result, we sort of are governed by the rumor of what the edicts were.
Mm-hmm. Well, oops. Can you still hear me, David? I've lost your video.
David has dropped off. I'm sure he'll rejoin in a second.
Okay.
While we wait for him, I wanted to ask, now that for everybody listening, depending on which time it is that they're listening to this, we're going through the whole COVID-19 thing. Freemasonry is essentially shut down in the United States, but there's this huge wave that it's turned digital, and it was almost like no, there we go.
I'm not sure what happened. Anyway, I was saying I thought it was insightful that you say that your Masonic code in Oklahoma focuses on prohibiting things instead of permitting things, and then people are reluctant to do things because they're worried that it might be prohibited simply because there's no explicit permission. In Massachusetts, the edicts of Grand Masters stand forever unless modified by a subsequent Grand Master, but there's no book of edicts. So it's government by rumor is my joke. You know, I think there's an edict about that, is a phrase you will frequently hear. And it constrains people in really dysfunctional ways that it's not intended to.
The behavior of Grand Lodges is unique in a sense that by and large, the resolutions that are presented before the annual communications of Grand Lodges have historically been prohibitive in nature. And they've always been the result of a Grand Master who's had a problem in one lodge. And in order to prevent that problem from becoming a statewide problem, a resolution is written just to simply prohibit, the thing. And so what we created in Oklahoma was essentially a code of prohibitions. And I know you're right in that lodges are so used to being controlled by the laws of the fraternity and by the authority of the Grand Master that if something is not mentioned in the code, they would rather not take a chance that it might be an innovation that may prove to be unpopular than to just simply not do anything for fear that they will get in trouble. So, one of the strategies that I think would be important if you're in a grand jurisdiction that has dealt with this kind of motivation for what has produced their general laws is to create a book of permitted practices. And you can address all elements of the fraternity in terms of things that are permitted. And if those permitted practices were adopted by the Grand Lodge, then you wouldn't have to get permission. Every time you wanted to do something, you had a good idea. Hopefully it would be covered in practices. So that's not a big thing, but that is one thing that Grand Lodges could do to kind of break this old pattern that we're already told what we can't do, and that means by default that other things that we want to do will probably be prohibited anyway. So we best not do them. We need to get beyond that attitude. Definitely. Yeah.
You say, the committees say in their report, I don't want to blame you for everything, say that, there's lodges who have lost the ability to perform the ritual. And then when the ritual is lost, so is the lodge. And
Yes.
that the strategic plan should consider what, if anything, might be done to preserve certain aspects of the ritual by employing technology in its presentation. I will confess that I read that line and immediately had a shiver up my spine negative reaction to it. But I have enough trust in you that I'm going to ask, what do you mean by that?
Sure. Well, in a general way, what I was referring to is that even though perhaps a majority of the lodges in Oklahoma can no longer confer the 3 degrees, there's many lodges that can confer everything but what we call the lectures. In our jurisdiction, we call them the 2nd and 3rd section lectures.
Right.
They were lectures that were largely penned by William Preston, and there's very few men in Oklahoma that are presenting those lectures, even though they're required to be presented. And I have encountered men who have never seen those lectures, and they've been Masons for 10 years. And so one thing we could digitize are those lectures, because there's very little esoteric work in those lectures. They're largely monitorial in our published monitors. And what little bit of esoteric language that might be in my Masonic monitor, I have discovered is not esoteric in your Masonic monitor. So in fact, with one exception, I can't think of anything in the Oklahoma 3rd section lectures that should be esoteric. And so if we could overcome that little tweak, then we could digitize those lectures. We could do privately. I've already had Dr. Jim Tressner record those lectures, just because I thought that if we were ever at a point where we could do that, there's no better voice for that than Jim Tressner's voice. But imagine if we had a voice like Tressner's, and every Grand Lodge has such a voice, doing the actual narrative, and then we could show contemporary visual images alongside the old lantern slides that gives the young man sort of a contemporary tie to the old idea. Then we would have accomplished 2 things. First of all, the young man, everybody in Lodge would be hearing those lectures, and many of them for the first time. And then secondly, they would be presented in a contemporary way. And so that's what I meant by using technology to help us get through those kinds of stumbling blocks. I disagree with using technology to replace the esoteric work of the tile lodges. Now, another aspect of that is a strategy that we just implemented, because we have a number of lodges that can no longer confer the degrees in our grand jurisdiction. We've created a number of district degree teams. And we've got 39 districts in Oklahoma, and we've already created 19 district degree teams. And the commitment those brothers are making is that any lodge that needs help with any of the 3 degrees, they're just a phone call away, and they will come out and either confer the degrees for them or give them the parts that they can't fill with their own men. But the point is, the degree work's getting done. Because the other problem you're faced with, if you cannot confer the degrees of Masonry, what incentive do you ever have to invite someone to be a member? What would you do with him if you got him? And so our ability to attract Masons is not going to be reconciled until we can make the conferral a possibility for every lodge in the
Bob, are those teams made up of older guys or younger guys?
A combination, a combination. We have some venerable teams that are primarily made up of my generation men who've been doing this at a district level for a few years. But uh, I would say more older men than younger men, just because a younger man's time is not, you know, it's harder for him on any given night of the week and go out and help. But but I'm not going to say that our district degree teams are made up only of older men. Some of them are made up of younger men that have become very active in the ritualistic aspects of the fraternity. But I don't care at this point. I'd rather see degree conferred than not, you know.
Right. You also say in this, in one section on targeted groups and special conferrals, I love the line that you say that it hasn't served the fraternity well to insist that every lodge is made for every man, or that more members are better than few members in a lodge. Yeah, my mother lodge is not for everyone. It isn't.
Right.
And I have,
That's right.
on those occasions when I have been the front door of my lodge, meaning I've met with people who are interested in Freemasonry, I have on occasion referred them to other places where I thought they might be happier.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I belong to a traditional lodge, and so, but the thing that American Freemasons need to know, they need to know that this idea that every lodge is for every man is an attitude that only exists in the United States, only exists in North America. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And in order to follow up with that idea, I got the Grand Lodge membership of every European country, and in South America, and in Australia. And I got the lodge membership within those grand jurisdictions. And with the exception of the Scandinavian countries, and I have not researched why it might be different in the Scandinavian countries, but with that exception, you know, the average number of members in every lodge in the world is between 25 and 50 members.
Yep.
Well, if you have 25 to 50 members in your lodge, I can assure you those are like-minded men. Those men have things in common that they share outside the fraternity. If London, England can have 1,200 lodges, Oklahoma City can have 200 lodges instead of the 10 or 12 that it has, you know? And that's what I mean by targeted lodges, affinity lodges. The European model, the South American model is all based on affinity. And that has nothing to do with income. It has nothing to do with a misdirected concept of elitism. It has everything to do with men coming together who know each other as men. They may be in the same occupations, but they share things in common that they can discuss outside the fraternity. They're already a fraternity. They just haven't been initiated into our fraternity. And so look at all of the population groups that we could attract. I mean, you know, people in the emergency medical professions, you know, firemen, law enforcement people, government officials, military. I mean, you can the list goes on and on. And these people, these groups exist in every metropolitan area and in many of the regional economic centers. I'm not saying an affinity lodge would work in a small town, but I'm saying that affinity lodges would work in any regional economic center in any state.
And even lodges like mine that see themselves as community lodges, for lack of a better term, every lodge has its own personality, its own. If we want to be esoteric, we say egregore. If we don't want to scare people, we can say, it develops its own personality in the lodge, and you don't want to be bringing people into a lodge that are going to be disruptive to that. That's why we talk so much about the harmony of the lodge and keeping the harmony of the lodge. I think it's important to think that through. But so many lodges are just desperate for members, and so they bring in, if a guy seems like he might be halfway decent, they bring him in before they find out enough about him to know whether or not he's going to be a good fit.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the vetting process has been pretty disappointing in our American culture.
We've gone through phases in that regard, trying to find the best way to get to know prospective members in a way that doesn't seem like stringing them along or making it adding too much more time. And the thing that has become really important to us is to invite them. A lot of lodges invite people to meals, but we really learn more when we invite our prospective members to informal social events.
Yes, and they learn a lot more about us. Yeah, it goes both ways. They learn a lot more about us. I mean, because you have to imagine they're wondering if they are a fit for this group of guys they've never met before, and so.
Yeah, I told someone a distant acquaintance was petitioning a lodge, and they invited him to a social event. And he asked me, what should I look out for? And I said, well, if you're going to a social event with a lodge, you should see, do they all break into cliques immediately and hang out in separate corners of the room? Or are people milling and enjoying each other's company? Do they laugh with one another? If a lodge doesn't laugh, don't join it.
Yes, that's right. And if a lodge doesn't come together in social activities, they're not being fraternal.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot more in this report that I think is of value and that I would love to discuss at some time, but I'm conscious of the fact that we've taken a considerable amount of your valuable time, and you probably have a book that you're writing and 42 things that you're working on. So I'm just going to ask you, what have I not asked about that I probably should have?
Well, I think that there's a new opportunity that we've not had, and it goes back to my original statement. Sometimes the stars just begin to align when you need for them to be in alignment, and that is this new thing that just came out that was put together by the Northern Masonic jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite, the Southern jurisdiction, and the Shrine Masons, called beafreemason.org. And I don't know if you have seen any of that, but it's wonderful stuff. The videos that are a part of that are very well done, and the genius that is behind that is just superb. Every man that talks on those videos are someone that you think you know. I mean, he's not a title man with a lot of jewelry on and lapel pins and fancy aprons. He's just a regular guy that's telling you something about what he gets out of Freemasonry. And then, of course, the joining opportunity that comes with that is just incredible. And now that Grand Lodges are connected to digital databases, all that can be managed through the Grand Lodge offices if they want to do it that way. So, and what's happening is, and we're creating one of these as I speak, there's going to be an OklahomaFreemason.org. And so that's going to be a tweet, to Oklahoma. And we're going to use the power of social media to attract men to the fraternity. We never had that opportunity before. And I've tested that in several places. I went and gave a talk about the power of social media to one of our Oklahoma City lodges earlier this year. And just for the fun of it, I said, let's do this. Let's send a Facebook post. We're going to send a Facebook post out to everybody from 18 to 62 years of age who are male, who live within 1 mile of your lodge. And we got 4,700 names. And I sat back there and I said, you have 4,700 men within 1 mile of your lodge that at least are of proper age to be a Mason. And now, with the power of social media, you can produce any demographic that you want to, any age group, any education level. You know what all the dynamics are in social media, and you can send out ads for very little money. I think they cost like $10, and they can respond directly to you if they have a curiosity. Well, my gosh, we have never had. I mean, one of the difficult things about being a lodge that's made up mainly of older members is those guys wouldn't know how to attract a young man to the fraternity if you paid them to do it, because they don't know any young men. They haven't known any young men since they were a young man. You're asking those old guys to do an impossible task. But now we have the digital capability to do that for us. And I think that is a very powerful tool that we're going to use, and I think a lot of Grand Lodges are going to use. So at the very least, I would encourage everybody to check out this beafreemason.org and encourage your Grand Lodge leadership to take a look at that. It was presented at the North American Grand Masters Conference, so every Grand Master saw it. At least the Grand Lodge leadership in every state knows about it. And I think it's a way that we can use technology to our great.
I have to say I agree with you about the quality of the materials that they produced. I think they're very compelling, very contemporary looking, and they get us away from the perception that we're a bunch of old men who get together and do weird things in decaying buildings.
Yes, right. I agree. Yeah, and that's a start. Now, if we're smart, we will teach our lodges how to introduce men to the fraternity in a proper way. I've put together one of the elements of the strategic plan. I'm suggesting that if a man clicks on, I'm interested in joining from one of those websites, that is the first of a 9-step process that you go through to determine for both of you if this is an organization that he needs to be a part of. And so this whole vetting thing that you talked about is also very, very important. We've got to get away from this assumption that every man is duly and truly prepared to be a Freemason, because they're not.
Very well said.
And we're looking for the ones who are, and we know how to find out if they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can't do it by talking. Yes. Anyway,
it takes time and effort, but it's very worthwhile. I agree.
Yes, and time is of the essence. The other thing that I would point out this evening is that if you have done the statistical analysis of your own grand jurisdiction, I can tell you that what you're going to find is that the men who are joining the fraternity today will not have this fraternity during the whole of their life. it's that critical that we start paying attention now. We've got about 30 years left. And so we need to start doing things differently sooner rather than later. And the sooner we raise our consciousness to the point to understand what needs to be done, the better opportunity we will have to turn this thing around.
Nick, do you have anything?
Not for the end of this, no.
Okay. Well, Bob, I have to tell you, one of the great privileges of being a Freemason is that I get to call you my friend and brother. Thank you so much for coming on with us tonight. Thank you so much for your service to our fraternity and for the really genuine care you show for future generations of Freemasons in your jurisdiction, but all across the United States. Thank you.
Well, thank you much. And it's a real privilege to call you a friend and brother, you and Nicholas both. I dearly love both of you.
Love you too.
He's always so generous. You think you can say something nice to him and get away with it, but you always end up one more step in debt to Bob Davis. All right, Nick, take us out.
I can't find our closing because it's been a while.
It has been a while, and we should thank people for sticking with us while we went through family changes. Nick and his wife have a 1-year-old now, which has been slightly disruptive to Nick's life. And my husband, Nathan, has had cardiac bypass surgery. He had a heart attack, a second heart attack, a third heart attack, cardiac bypass surgery, an infection following the surgery. It's been a long, hard fight to get back to normal. So, and now we're all locked down in our individual houses.
Yeah.
So normal is even relative, but it's taken us a while to get back to producing 3 distinct knocks. So thank you for all of you who reached out and said that you missed us. We hope to be back to more regular production, but I'm going to stick to my guns that if we don't have anything worthwhile to say, we're going to be silent. So hopefully we'll have more worthwhile things to say in the near future. Did I stall enough for you, Nick, or can you still not find it?
I still can't find it, but it's all right. I'll add it later.
Okay, you can add it later. And with that, I think we're done. Although, Nick, you have developed a relationship with Masonic Revival. Do they have any cool new products that we should know about?
Yes, we're actually still trying to design Brother Bob's tie for when he's Grandmaster.
Ooh.
I think we may have overloaded him with samples.
Well, I have an idea that I need to talk to you about. So,
all right, we'll talk.
I'm still stunned by the past high priest, past illustrious master reversible apron. That's just the coolest thing I ever saw. So go to Masonic Revival, buy some of their products. This is a difficult time for a lot of small businesses, including our small Masonic businesses. So, if you know a business that's run by a brother and you have a little bit of extra money, go and buy something cool for yourself and support Ascended Masters, Masonic Revival, all those little businesses that are trying to push out new and interesting things to support our fraternity. And with that, good night, Bob. Good night, Nick.
Good night. Yep.
Good night, brothers. Talk to you soon.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.